So with that, I'll open with a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this good and glorious day. Thank you for us being here, having the will and having the health to be able to come. Ask that you be with Doug Tilton and his work in South Africa and the other African countries that we will hear about today. May we understand those words, take them to heart, and keep him safe and sound in all the work that he does for your kingdom. Ask that we bless this day for all of us. Amen. And with that, I would welcome, there's Brian off to my left. I have to say, where is he? He's out of my vision. Brian will introduce Doug.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I know I'm not normally around during the week because I'm normally on travels, as most of you know. Some of those travels take me down into Africa, into South Africa. And in fact, I leave to go there tomorrow. I'm leaving Doug behind up here. And to be honest, that's how we have a relationship through, in the past, through Donegal, through Presbytery, with a Eastern Cape Presbytery, the Ontata. And I got involved and been privileged to go up into that area, which is very much different to what you think in many ways. Doug will probably talk about that in other countries. And when I go down there, if I'm down there on a weekend, I go normally to a Presbyterian church. And the one I go to is Stellenbosch. And about, I think it was at Christmas, Tony, who was the pastor of that church, said, well, you need to meet somebody. And I was introduced to Doug. He was at the church service as well. We didn't know each other until I didn't even know about the ministry that he was doing down there. And so we got to talking, and well, the end result is he's with us for this weekend, because I asked him if he'd come and share something about what the Lord is doing in difficult countries, but in some ways incredible. And he's going to tell you some incredible numbers, the number of Presbyterians. When I go out to the Eastern Cape, it's obviously a fully black community. I'm normally the only white, or my colleague goes with me too. We're the two white guys in this whole thing. But we were out there last year, and their Sunday attendance is like 400 solid. And they've just built an extension to the church and things like that. So the Lord is doing a lot of great things in these countries, and we don't hear about it. So the idea of bringing Doug in is to give you an appreciation. I hope it's an encouragement to see what God is doing in the countries that we often neglect and we think negatively because of what we're told by the publicity. But in these countries, there's a lot of good work going on that the Lord is really blessing and growing. So without further ado, Doug basically is from, he's supported out of Louisville, out of your mission offerings. Okay, so he's one of us, very much so. And this is really a privilege, Doug, to have you with us and to share your ministry with us. And as I've got to know you, I've certainly learned also a lot about what's going on. So over to Doug.
Thank you, Brian. It's been wonderful to get to know folks at Westminster a bit and to be with you on Sunday, and I really appreciate the invitation to be here today. It's a beautiful church and a wonderful congregation, and I'm so excited by all the ways which you are involved in mission locally and around the world. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about my story, but also particularly the stories of our partners in other parts of Southern Africa. I went out to South Africa as a mission diaconal worker. It's a category of service we no longer have, in 1992. So that was after Nelson Mandela had been released from prison and the decision was taken to move towards a democratic state, but before the first elections in 1994. So I was in KwaZulu-Natal, based south of Durban on the upper south coast, through the first elections and worked in peacemaking in that area, because it's an area where there had been a lot of conflict between the Inkatha Freedom Party and the African National Congress, but also for the electoral structures through the first election in in 1994. I came back to the US and was working for a while in the Washington office on Africa, all still under the auspices of the PCUSA. And at that stage, I was asked to go back to South Africa to work for the parliamentary office that the South African Council of Churches was setting up. Because, of course, prior to 1994, the only way that the churches had to speak to the government was in the streets. And this was a new venture. And somebody had the bright idea that because I had been working in Washington, it would translate well to a parliamentary system, which it did not. But I had a steep learning curve. I learned a lot during time there. We were doing workshops in communities to encourage people and teach them how to engage the public policy process. Some of the other things we worked with the labor unions and the NGO coalition to do a people's budget every year to kind of critique the budget that the national government was coming up with, to suggest ways that it could be better, more effective at redistributing wealth within the country. So that was a very exciting time because all the law books were being rewritten during that stage. And I remember carrying my little copy of the Constitution around every day, and most meetings we went to, we'd have to get it out and say, we can use section 27 and do this, and section 28. So it was an exciting time to be involved in public policy advocacy, which is really my background. In 2007, I got asked to work as a regional liaison for PCUSA. Initially, it was just South Africa and Lesotho, that little country completely surrounded by South Africa. But over the years, other countries were added. And so now I work with South Africa, Lesotho, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Madagascar, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more about right now. But just to give you a larger picture too, regional liaisons perform a kind of linking and bridging role throughout the world. And in Africa, we have 5 regional liaisons in different regions. And so that gives you a sense of what countries are covered. The dark ones are ones where we actually have partner churches to whom regional liaisons relate. The lighter colors are sort of, if something were to come up in that area, that's who would be called upon. So I would also deal with things in Angola and Namibia and in Botswana should something arise. The role of regional liaison is primarily to build relationships with our traditional ecclesial or denominational partners. And in Southern Africa, there are 9 churches to whom we relate, 9 denominational partners scattered throughout those 5 countries I named. In addition, we provide support, encouragement, supervision, and advocacy for PCUSA mission personnel, such as Elizabeth Turk, pictured here at a clinic in rural Madagascar. Elizabeth and her husband, Dan, are our mission co-workers in Madagascar. We also resource mission networks and facilitate mid-council and congregational partnerships. So there are mission networks that bring together congregations and mid-councils with interest in particular places in the world. We do not currently have a South Africa and Lesotho mission network, but we do have a Madagascar mission network. And we have, kind of unusually, a Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, USA mission network, which covers that whole region. And this is actually a photo from one of their meetings just before COVID in Austin, Texas. And finally, I have an additional role that other regional liaisons do not have, and that's because of my background in public policy advocacy. I also help to support the advocacy work that the denomination does. In this case, this is a meeting of the Congo Mission Network when they were going to meet with members of Congress. So I want to give you a little bit of insight about the way that the PCUSA partners at a denominational level with our denominational partners in Southern Africa. And I'm going to look today specifically at Madagascar. So I'm happy to take questions or talk about any of these countries where I have been active, but I'm going to talk particularly about Madagascar today. It's most people, when they think about Madagascar, what do you think of? Madagascar comes up, what comes to mind?
Animals,
Animals.
strange, different animals.
There you go.
Vanilla.
Vanilla. Anything else? Lots of times if I speak to audiences with kids,
Disney.
Oh,
is-
Madagascar.
the movies, yeah, the movies, yeah, which emphasize those animals, things like the little mouse lemur here, or the tenric, which is sort of porcupine-like, or one of my favorites is this leaf gecko. When I took a picture of that, it was on the branch, and we had to move it off so you could see it because it's so well camouflaged. When it's on the branch, you really can't see the critter is there. So there are all kinds of interesting animals in Madagascar. There is particularly well known are the lemurs on the left. This is the one of the largest lemurs, and on the right, chameleons, also well known. Those are two separate photos, by the way. They're not, the lemur's not getting ready to eat the chameleon. Just for a bit of fun, I thought I would include this too, if I can get it to go, just so you can hear the. You love the lipstick? They're amazing creatures. And of course, they're not found anywhere else in the world. It's a large island. Any guesses in how it would compare to US states? About the same size as?
Texas, Montana together.
Well, you're doing what most people don't do, and that's overestimating. It's about the same size as Texas. Yeah. It's fourth largest island in the world. It's about 3 times the size of Great Britain. I grew up with the Mercator projection maps that kind of shrink the southern hemisphere. So it always looked about the same size as Great Britain in my map, but it's about 3 times the size of Great Britain, and it's got incredible biodiversity. More than 80% of the species, both flora and fauna in Madagascar, are not found anywhere else in the world. So it is a real jewel of God's creation and something that we need to protect. Now, all those animated films didn't have any people in, but Madagascar's got people too. It's got about 30 million people. And they have varied backgrounds. Some of the strands that are most prominent are from kind of Indonesia, Malaysia, that area, and also from along the west coast of Africa as well. We have a partner church there. Sometimes folks are surprised to learn that there is a church that follows Presbyterian polity in Madagascar. It's called the Church of Jesus Christ in Madagascar. It was formed out of churches planted by the London Missionary Society and the Paris Evangelical Mission, and also some Friends Overseas Mission congregations as well. And it numbers about 6 million people. So it is about 4 times the size of the Presbyterian Church USA, which is one of the reasons why I talk about it, because it's a big church and very dynamic and very active and is involved in a lot of different areas. It has 8,000 congregations around the island. And in fact, the Church General Assembly took a decision that they wanted to have a congregation in every, they call it Tukatane, commune, every kind of community across the island, wall to wall. And they achieved that goal in 2019, planting congregations in the 407 communes that had not previously had an FJChem congregation. They only have about 2,000 pastors, so if your math is good, you can tell that many pastors, particularly outside of the urban areas, serve multiple churches. I've met pastors that serve as many as 14 churches and have to travel as much as 75 miles from one end of their area to another, often using public transport or on foot. Not that many people in rural areas have motorized vehicles, even motorcycles. So it's a challenge. So the church it's exciting to see a church that is so involved. The church relies a lot on its elders. They have a special elder training program, and that's very important as well. I want to share a little bit, though, particularly about my friend, Pastor Helival Poget. Pastor Helival is, she is a social worker. She is a theologian, and she currently heads this is her with her family, her kids and their children. She heads up the chaplaincy program for the FJKM right now, and that has many different branches. It covers a lot of the traditional things that we might expect: hospitals, military, prisons, police, university, but it has some more unusual categories as well. You'll see skin disorders there, and that's because there is discrimination against people who have albinism. So albino people are considered to be a matter of concern, seen as witches or dangerous people. And so the church is kind of sort of speaking out against that. And the lower right one there is the chaplaincy to marginalized people, SAPIFA. And that's really where Pastor Helival got her start as a social worker. She works here in the capital city, Antananarivo. When I first met her, she was working with a community center in Sutri, which is a sort of a poorer area of the capital city. And it was here where she first encountered a young woman by the name of Mampianuna. Mampianuna came to this center, which provided some food, it provided vocational education, it provided just a place to sit and chat and have a listening ear. And in 2009, there was a military coup in Madagascar and overthrew the democratically elected government. And it caused a great deal of economic disruption in the country and disruption to supply networks. And many people were thrown out of work. And you can see this little chart, which shows a number of different things, but particularly the line of human development here, the blue line, really declined rapidly after 2009. So a lot of people were in difficult circumstances. And there were government officials and unscrupulous operators who took advantage of that and particularly began to recruit people for overseas work on labor contracts. Now, Mampianuna came to Pastor Helival and said she was thinking about taking a job in Lebanon as a domestic worker. And Helival says, you know, I didn't think that was a very good idea. I told her I didn't think it was a very good idea, but I didn't tell her no. And Mampianuna took the job, and about 6 months later, Mampianuna's family was getting in touch with Pastor Helival to ask her to try to find Mampianuna because they'd lost contact with her. And ultimately, Pastor Helival went to Lebanon to try to find Mampianuna. What she found was that the promises that were made to women when they were offered jobs in domestic employment abroad were not usually honored. Oftentimes, women were working in effectively sort of slave conditions. They were expected to work 18, 20 hours a day, not given any place to sleep. They slept on the floor of the kitchen. They ate with the animals. And in many cases, not in Lebanon at that time, but in other places that came up later, your ability to be in the country is tied to your employment. So if you try to run away from your employment, you immediately become illegal and are subject to being rounded up and put in prison. So this was all new to Pastor Helival. She had not been exposed to this before. And she eventually did find Mampianuna, but she found her in the city morgue. And she said she was present at the autopsy. She said it was clear that Mampianuna had been very badly abused before her death. So she began to really work with the honorary consul that Madagascar had at the time in Lebanon to try to identify women who were in similar circumstances. And she ultimately managed to get about 280 women a flight of folks going back to Madagascar. And she established the chaplaincy to marginalized people primarily to assist people returning and to reintegrate them because sometimes family members find this a bit shameful. They think that somebody shouldn't have gone abroad. And so oftentimes families don't always welcome people back. And so the church has been working to kind of do that reinsertion and family integration. In 2013, the PCUSA asked Pastor Laval to be an international peacemaker and to come to the US to share her experiences. As she was wrapping up her time here, she received a call from a colleague of hers saying, with a very similar story, that her sister and her niece had gone to Kuwait and they had lost contact with them. And she said to us, we don't have any contacts in Kuwait. Can the PCUSA help us to find people to relate to on the ground who can help us to figure out what's going on in Kuwait? And through the PCUSA Human Trafficking Roundtable, we were able to get some contacts. We put her in contact with the US Embassy also in Kuwait, and she was able to travel to Kuwait and to identify a number of people, in this case, particularly people who had been put in prison for running away from their work. She was able to find eventually on a second trip, she was able to find the sister of the colleague. The story was a better story there. The niece was brought home and the sister has since come home as well. But it was a very difficult situation and she sort of felt like it was deja vu. A lot of what we have been doing is just providing support, encouragement, and contact for several months after that. We were in conversation virtually daily basis. And often what Pastor Oliva asked for was just for prayer, for people to be praying for her situation. We would pray together on the phone and just for that kind of spiritual support, because she found this very difficult to move through. But eventually she was able to get a number of the women back. About 200 women have come back from Kuwait, but government estimates there are several thousand women still in domestic service in Kuwait. One of the things I like about the way that Pastor Helaval works is she's very good about spreading things out through the church. Pastor Helaval is also a professor at the School of Theology. FJCAM maintains 6 seminaries in Madagascar, and she teaches at the one in Antananarivo, and she has a missiology course where she requires her students to do a 3-week stage, an internship around the island somewhere to look at social issues in particular. It might be domestic violence, it might be substance abuse, it might be prostitution and sex work, it might be sex tourism. But they go out and they learn, they talk to local people, they learn about what's happening in the area. They are supposed to do a paper at the end which explains the issue and suggests ways the church might engage it, so that when pastors are going out around the island, they have this experience and background, they have the eyes to see some of the issues that are going on in the around the island. I like this was a photo of my colleague Christy Boyd, who is regional facilitator for women's and children's interests. She's based in the Congo. She was interviewing some of these students about their experiences. At the end of the table is Pastor Tsua. Pastor Tsua is from Nusi Bay, which is an island off the north of the island of Madagascar. Pastor Tsua eventually then was assigned to a church on the east side of the island near the town of Tomasina. It was on a major kind of trucking line. So there was a place in that community where a lot of truckers stopped for the night. There were hotels, there were nightclubs. You can see where this is going. And so Pastor Tsua was working with folks in the congregation, particularly to build awareness of the situation there and to ensure that there was support for young people so they didn't get drawn into the sex trade that was happening around the trucking line. They also had a graphite mine in the community that was Chinese owned, and they worked with the labor there to try to get better conditions for the graphite mines. This was important because one of Helaval's other students in a later year came and did her internship. Pastor Rutsabula did her internship with Pastor Tsua. So there's a way that this kind of passes on, the gift gets passed on. Pastor Rutsabula here on the right then got assigned to a church in Bevelani, up here in the northwest of Madagascar, a rural area. This is exactly the kind of rural town from which young people often want to go to the bright lights of the big city of Antananarivo in a way that makes them very vulnerable to either sex work and sex trafficking, or to domestic labor trafficking as well, because labor trafficking is a big part of the trafficking concerns. And Pastor Rutsamula, with the help of Presbyterian women, has been running a program there called Project Mamunzi, which helps to train both adults and children to make them more aware of the dangers of trafficking, to help them to resist that. They talk to kids in particular about, people are not for sale. We go to the market and what do we see? We see carrots, we see onions, and we don't see people for sale, because people are not for sale. God loves every individual, values every individual, and people should not be sold. So it's a kind of an inoculation, if you will, of kids from a young age. The other thing that Pastor Elavao has discovered is that many times the women who were moving abroad for domestic work, it was an economic motivator, but also many of them faced problems at home with domestic violence. And so they've also incorporated a domestic violence component into this training as well for the adults to raise awareness around domestic violence concerns, and to give other options and do training around that. I like this, again, another illustration of how we engage in partnership. Christy Boyd had shared these posters with Elavao because they were developed by women in the church in the DRC, in the Congo. So they were in French, which is the colonial language in Madagascar as well. And Pastor Elavao had them translated into Malagasy too. And so those are the posters which they are using in the training project in Bebelani. We were able to take Pastor Elavao with us on a trip to Philippines and Hong Kong earlier, about a year ago now. And she there was exposed, she felt a real connection with the Philippines because as island nations, there were similar issues. But in the Philippines, a lot of people move abroad for work with the encouragement and support of the government, whereas in Madagascar, the government has opposed people moving abroad for work purposes. So it exposed her to a new way of providing support, talking with the churches about how we can lobby for more protection for workers who move abroad. And that was a new thing for her. About a month after she got back, there was a big story in the Malagasy press because two bodies washed up on the shore in a small town in the north of Madagascar, just near Antsiranana, here at the northern tip. And they became aware of the fact that because the government is prohibiting people from moving abroad for labor contracts, a lot of that is now becoming illicit. And so there are people who are smuggling people off the coast. There are about 2 or 3 small boats that leave a day from that area. And the only reason why this turned up was because of the fact that some of the bodies washed up. Oftentimes, what she found out when we went up there, because we went up there in November of last year, and she heard from folks locally that there are often accidents in the channel between Madagascar and Mayotte, which is a French department about 250 miles, a small island about 250 miles off the coast of Madagascar, where people often head. And so there are a lot of dangers and a lot of risks in that area. She was able to bring this more to the attention of the local church because she says, the local church says this is political. We don't going to get involved in this. This is political. And she really was bearing the message that Christ calls us to be witnesses and to really share our concern for all people, and that it's part of Christ's mission to ensure that all people are protected and have a good life. And so because I was there, we went up there. She wouldn't have probably been able to get up there otherwise. And it gave her an opportunity to both see the locale, to talk with the local evangelists, to visit people in prison who had been in prison for actually helping these people to get back to shore, but they were accused by the authorities of helping them to leave illegally, and so they ended up being in prison, including the mayor of that town. So we were able to visit them in prison as well. And she is continuing her conversations with the churches in Antsiranana around how to raise these concerns and provide a support network as we move from being an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff to pick people up and reinsert them to do more building of fences at the top of the cliff. Pastor Elaval's request is always for prayer and for support, and so we are often in prayer for her, and I would ask you to be in prayer for the FJKM, for the people of Madagascar, and for the work that she is doing. I share this story because I think it is an illustration of the ways in which we do mission in partnership. Just as you do here locally and around the world, we are taking the lead from our partners. We are not going in with our own agendas, but rather we are meeting them where they are and hearing the concerns that they have and trying to find ways of coming alongside them to pursue the work and the ministries that they are doing. So we always try to follow this policy document that was adopted by the PCUSA in 2003, which affirms the PCUSA's commitment to principles of shared grace and thanksgiving, mutuality and interdependence, recognition and respect, open dialogue and transparency, and the sharing of resources. So mission co-workers are an important part of that around the world to help to build those connections and bridge cultures in the US and in various places around the world, involved in many different ways in health, in agriculture, in education, in public policy advocacy, different places around the world. Christy Boyd and I were invited by Pastor Elaval to speak to a group of women in a rural community in the center of Madagascar a number of years ago. And it was a community that was not served by any roads. It only had a train line into the community. And so we weren't going on a day the train was running. So she said, well, we have to walk in. And said, okay, it's about two kilometers. I said, that's no problem. Well, it was more like 8 kilometers, but we walked along the rail line, and there were folks from the village who came out to meet us and to help us to return to the village. And as we walked along the rail line, it got a little bit difficult because the ties were spaced, and you tried to walk on the ties, you walk in between the ties, and it was getting a bit tiring. And finally, they said to us, you know, you need to learn to walk on the rails the way that we do. And they demonstrated. And here's Christy walking with Madame Florentina. We still have things to learn because if you're really good at it, you can carry a parcel on your head at the same time. But the important thing is you hold hands and you walk at the same pace. And I thought this was a lovely image for the way that we do partnership, because one person can't run along in front of somebody else. You got to stay together. And one person doesn't have all the resources. You rely on each other. I thought of that African proverb about if you want to go far, go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Well, this is actually a way of doing both. You can go faster when you go together in this way. And this is, I think, the way that we seek to be in partnership with one another, where we clasp hands and we walk forward together. So I hope that will inspire you in your work too, in the mission, as you continue to consider ways to walk alongside partners in Southern Africa and in Eastern Cape, and in your own local community, because I know that Westminster is also very involved in the local community as well. So I just wanted to share some of those thoughts with you, and I'm happy to take any questions on any of those topics, and I see there's several. I'll start back there.
When did Christianity come to Madagascar?
1818. And the fact I was recently, just before COVID, I was able to take part in the 200th anniversary celebrations of the FJKM. It was London Missionary Society missionaries came in 1818, David Jones and I can't remember the other one's name, but they landed near Tomasina, and first thing they did was set up a school. So the FJKM also has 720 schools around the island too. But There was a period when the royal family in Madagascar, because there was a royal family, and it was often queens of Madagascar. There were both kings and queens, but there were a number of queens in Madagascar. One of the queens decided she did not like Christianity, and she threw all the missionaries out in the mid 19th century and killed a number of the converts, the local converts. So there are in Madagascar and Antananarivo, there are a series of churches which are known as the martyred churches, which are named after the various people who were tied up and thrown off the cliffs in Madagascar in persecution for their Christian belief. But it's been yeah, they celebrate 200 years of Christianity. There was yes, here.
Was that one girl carrying a rifle for balance or for?
Oh no, it's actually not a rifle, it's an umbrella. Sorry. Yes, sir.
Last year, I picked up a book at the airport on wilding, environmental term. There was a chapter on Madagascar. And wilding basically is reintroducing rare or endangered species to a local location. And I take it that there's a large preserve or two in Madagascar. But one of the tenets of that is trying to encourage or educate the local population to the economic benefits of supporting that kind of policy with animals and so on. So it's pretty interesting.
And the church in Madagascar is very much involved in that. It's one of the things I love, and I spoke a little bit about it on Sunday, that they have a strong ecological education program and a strong sense of protection of the integrity of God's creation. It has been less around rewilding and more around trying to prevent destruction of the remaining forest cover, because Madagascar has lost about 90% of its forest cover since 1950. So it's shrinking rapidly, and that, of course, affects habitat. There's smuggling of rare woods like rosewood and ebony and things like that. The church is really looking more at, because there's been population growth from about 9 million in the late 50s to 30 million now, there's pressure on the land for agriculture, for food, et cetera. And so the church is really working to help promote growing of fruit trees, growing of alternative crops, growing fast-growing trees that can be used for charcoal rather than cutting down native forests and things like that. And also just to promote, it's interesting, I've gone with Dan Turk, our mission co-worker there, into the countryside, and he always asks about, well, where is this tree? Where is that tree? Because he says, you know, lots of times people know these trees, they're just there, and they just think they're just ordinary things. And he asks about them specifically to promote awareness of them and respect for them. This is something important. The person coming from outside is asking about that, so it must be something valuable and important. And so to try to build that sort of sense of the value of native trees, yeah. So I'm right all the way in the back, sir.
So in your 5 countries, how many dialects are there and how many do you speak?
Probably about, let's see. Well, there are 12 official languages in South Africa, but there are a lot more that are spoken. I don't know. And the same with Zimbabwe has 2 official languages, but again, a lot more is spoken. Madagascar supposedly only has 1. But then when you ask about dialects, there are about 18 dialects, 18 ethnic groups. I don't know, somewhere maybe around 50 different languages to be spoken. I speak English. I also speak some French. I have had a little bit of Zulu. I've never been in a situation. A lot of our mission co-workers who are embedded with a particular partner, like the Turks, Dan and Elizabeth Turk, speak Malagasy fluently, because they're working all the time with one particular community. I have never had the pleasure of doing that. When I have been embedded in with the South African Council of Churches, it was in a context where the lingua franca was English. So I have always been in that situation. So I speak French when I go to Madagascar, but I do not have any deep knowledge of language. That's not one of my gifts, I'm afraid. Sir.
I've read that in many parts of Africa, there's been a resurgence or an increase in nationalistic and racial pride And this has led to a growing resentment of white folks coming in and telling us what to do. I wonder if you've encountered any of that, what kind of challenge that would pose for your mission.
I think anybody resents people coming in and telling them what to do, regardless of race. And I think that that's part of the reason why we try not to do that. Because I really think that there is a long history of Presbyterian mission that dates back to 1830s. There has been a lot that has been life affirming and life building that has happened in terms of health and education over the years. But we also have had times when Presbyterian mission personnel come in and run things and do pretty much tell people what to do. But I think we have been trying very hard over the last 50 years to move away from that model. I'm not sure we've always entirely succeeded. I think we need to keep paying attention to that. But as I say, our starting point is always, where are you seeing needs for ministry? Where would you like us to come alongside you? Not going in and saying, you need to be doing this. And, I will be honest, sometimes well-meaning congregations will go and see, or they'll have folks come from Kenya or Taiwan or wherever, and they'll hear about things and they'll say, oh, we need to do this. And the question I always ask is, have you talked to people locally? Is that what they want you to do? Because I think that needs to be our starting point. I have this problem too, and that is, as an American, I want to fix things. I'm going to go in, I see a problem, and I want to think, oh, I can do this. And I always have to kind of take a step back and say, wait, just wait until you're asked. And I think that is our approach. But we want to be ready. We want to continue to know people well, build relationships. That's where we start. We don't kind of build buildings very much anymore, but we build relationships with people, and we get to know people, and we get to hear from them what it is that they want and how we can walk alongside them. And I think we need to kind of stick to those principles. It is true that is not universally the way the church behaves around the world, but we can only worry about ourselves, I think. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I think it does, but also what you said brings a challenge of patience.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Of getting, because things won't happen, as you said, usually that Americans especially want to get things done immediately, not take the time to understand the full picture, because they know what's right. Mm-hmm. So just do it. Mm-hmm. As opposed to building the relationships takes years, I would think, in just about all of those countries.
It does, yeah. And we don't always know what's right.
And so the accomplishments from one person that's over there or a group may not be realized as accomplishments until the next group of people are in to continue the relationship building. Mm-hmm. And that's where the folks back in the US who oversee things need to have the patience also and understand that same approach.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the things we've learned through the Donegal relationship that we had with Eastern Cape. I certainly went out there, typically American or British or whatever you want to call me. But basically, I think the thing that I learned is to learn about their culture first, and then also bring them, because they ask me questions about, they read a lot of stuff, CNN and things like that. They can't understand why our culture is so different to their culture. Yeah. And one of the things that I think I've learned from going there for 10 years is I understand the Xhosa culture. I understand how they set up. I understand the local, because we could go in, we can offer money, we can do that. That's not what they're looking for. They really want to understand you as a person. Mm-hmm. We've had people over here that have stayed in our home. We've smiled about some of their things they do, because they're so different. You don't, until you get really close to these Christian brothers and sisters, we sometimes don't understand how they work, and we always think they work as we do. And I think that's been one of the big learning curves that I took away from the Eastern Cape. And language is an issue. A lot of people in the Eastern Cape don't speak English, so we always had to be translated. They speak Xhosa, okay, which is quite a unique language. But more and more people are now starting to learn English through the schools. A lot of the church members don't actually speak.
And I'll say more and more people are starting to learn Xhosa as well.
Yeah,
Because I mean, like my godkids, they grew up in Cape Town. They are from a community that would not normally have learned Xhosa at home. They don't. They actually speak English at home, though most of their colleagues are Afrikaans speakers. But they're learning. They've learned Xhosa in school because it's now part of the curriculum, which it wouldn't have been before. So things are changing too. So we have one right at the back first. I think he's in front of
Two questions. I was
Yeah.
curious if our denomination is the largest missionary program in Madagascar. And my other question is, tell us a little bit about your early background and how you got into this.
Sure. So I'm not sure I know the answer to the first question. We have 2 mission personnel there now. I'm sure the other one that's a likely candidate would be the Lutheran Church, because the Lutheran Church is also strong in Madagascar. The Catholic Church is the largest, then the FGKM, then the Lutheran Church. So I know there have been Lutheran missionaries in Madagascar. I'm not sure I know of any currently. In fact, there was a couple where she was Presbyterian pastor, he was a Lutheran pastor, and they were a couple. They were there for a number of years in the 90s. I think that I got to tell you, around the world today, I think that most missionaries, mission workers, mission personnel are coming as independent. Either they're coming through something like Wycliffe Bible Translators or SIL, or they're coming from a particular independent congregation, that a mega church somewhere that sends people. There's a lot of that, and I don't know that there is too much. I know that the Turks often try to get in touch with and network with other mission workers from other places, but that community, I think that the impact of COVID has also affected that. So I don't know how big it is right now in Madagascar. So I don't know. We have a presence, and certainly for the FJKM, we are the only folks who are sending mission workers. I think the Paris, the French church also has a couple of mission workers there, but there are not nearly as many as there used to be. My own background is I got involved in anti-apartheid work in college. My father was a pastor. My mother, I think, would have been a pastor. She'd been born a couple years later. I was grown up steeped in the Presbyterian Church, but when I got to college, I was not interested in the Presbyterian Church. What I was interested in was South Africa. I got exposed to it fairly early on, and that was kind of my main extracurricular activity. But I soon found that the folks who shared my concern about justice and peace in South Africa were Presbyterians. And so I got more and more involved in the Synod of Lakes and Prairies. I went to college in Minnesota. And when I had a chance to do more academic work beyond my undergraduate degree, I thought I was going to do law, but I got a chance to study in the UK, and there's no point in doing law in the UK. So I started doing more work on South Africa, history of political economy in South Africa, and did my advanced degrees there. And then was helping to lead a Gift of New Eyes trip to South Africa in 1991, just after Nelson Mandela's release. And that touched off a whole series of events that ended up with me being asked to go and work in South Africa. So I never thought I would have any use to the PCUSA or anybody else outside of South Africa, but hopefully God has had other plans. So it's been a real learning curve for me to get to know Zimbabwe and Madagascar in particular. We do less in Mozambique and Lesotho, but particularly Zimbabwe and Madagascar. And so it's been exciting to see how God has been working in these places too. Yes, Ted.
A little different than on the mission side. What's the economy? What drives the economy of Madagascar?
Well, Minerals is one. And that's. I mean, for most people, it's an agricultural economy. So it's a rice-based economy. Cattle are the asset that most families have. So agriculture is very important in kind of daily life for folks. But in terms of global engagement, minerals, they've got uranium, they've got sapphires, they've got gold. There's a lot of artisanal gold miners in Madagascar as well. And I understand they have the largest deposits of vanadium in the world, or highest quality. Now, I don't use vanadium myself personally very much, as far as I know, but I think it has, for long-term battery technology, it's going to be very important. So one of the issues right now is that Madagascar is really beginning to be open for more resource exploitation, and that is both a blessing and a curse. Those would be and tourism. Tourism was, at least up until the coup of 2009, tourism was also growing, and ecotourism. I mean, lemurs are cute. People want to see lemurs. So, there's a lot of folks who go to Madagascar for that reason too. Yes, sir.
So as far as traveling there, mainly air or ship, or how do you get around?
To Madagascar? Yeah, it's air. I mean, there are flights out of Johannesburg to Antananarivo, the capital's international airport. So I think Air France flies in because, of course, the colonial connection with France. So that's still strong. Air France flies in. I think Turkish Airlines served it for a while, and Ethiopian Airlines serves it. So that's and Kenyan, I think, too, also. So there are international connections in from the continent and even some from Europe. And there are airports around. So it takes about, when we went up to Amsterdam, we flew, and that was about an hour, a little over an hour flight. And I've also been down to the south to Diego. That's about an hour and a half to the south. So, it's a big island, but there are domestic flights as well.
Yeah. Are they ravaged by cyclones or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Every year there's cyclones. Cyclone season is kind of January, February into March even. And the cyclones have been getting more powerful and more frequent as climate change comes along. The South has been badly damaged by drought over the last 30 years. Again, there's discussion and dispute and disagreement, I think, in the community about whether that's to the extent to which that's climate driven, but there are a lot of people who do think that's climate change driven. But it's been a real problem for folks in the South. The church, there was a kind of one of those agreements about you get that part and we get that part with the Lutherans. So the FJKM used to do the north of the island, the Lutherans used to do the south. So the FJKM was less strong in the South, and part of the reason for that goal of having churches in every community was because there was less in the South, but they're doing more in the South. And they're also that means the church is also working to tackle some of the water issues and agriculture issues in the South now too, in a new way. So, yes, ma'am.
I was involved in building a well in Malawi. One of the things that became very apparent with the young girls is that they were not giving them an alternative as far as building skills. I mean, they were going to become laborers outside of Malawi, which is an enclave, as you know. But what are they doing in the way of giving these young girls and young people alternative skills so they don't have to go and become domestic workers?
Yeah. I think that Pastor Laval, that's kind of where she got her start. That center I talked about in Isutri at the beginning, that part of what they were doing was giving vocational skills to young women in particular. And now there is a center that's run jointly between the FJKM and the Lutheran Church in Antananarivo, where they're training. It's linked to the street ministry that Pastor Laval has to go out and talk to people who are on the streets at night, and particularly the sex workers, saying, do you want other opportunities? Do you want other ways of making a living? If so, we can offer you training. They do training in cutting and tailoring. They do computer skills. They do hairdressing. They do catering. There are a range of things that people can do to learn in this center in Antananarivo. It's a drop in the bucket for what needs to be done. But that is the kind of starting point. And I agree that she is very much aware of the fact that you have to try to provide other economic opportunities in addition to just also helping people to understand the risks involved. Because I mean, very often, you know, I was amazed when we were in Alabama with Pastor Laval a couple of years ago. The Alabama Human Trafficking Task Force, one of the churches we were, got them to come and do a joint project with her, joint presentation with her. And the grooming techniques that were used in Alabama and in Madagascar were virtually identical. So making people aware of the fact that these are the kinds of things people do. This is the kinds of offers they make. They don't, you know, it sounds like a good thing, but these are some of the outcomes and consequences. That's another aspect of trying to build prevention too, in addition. So there are some things going on around vocational training, not nearly enough.
Is there a good education system, general education, like we think of education systems?
There is public education. Most kids don't go beyond 6th grade. I mean, well, half the kids don't go beyond 6th grade. The church has its own schools. It has about 720 schools around the island, and we have been supporting them in an effort to improve teaching skills. So there has been a program called EBMI, Evidence-Based Methods of Instruction, where teachers are learning new techniques that really rely on kind of more interaction amongst the students and not just rote learning, copy this down, but actually kind of interactive skills with the students. They have just built a new teacher training college, which was opened in October, which is going to be teaching their teachers that it's going to be part of the curriculum. The success they have achieved with that has been nothing short of miraculous, because the classes that have received where teachers have been using the EBMI techniques, test scores have gone, because there's a national exam, and the results of the test scores have moved from in the 60 percentile to 90 percentile. So it's been a huge jump. And what we've heard from other teachers is that even when if kids get that early on, even if they go into other classrooms that don't use those techniques, they still continue to do better. And so the church schools in general perform better than the public schools on the exams, but this is really giving them an additional boost, with the added factor that it gives a lot of it's an opportunity to share Christian values, ethics as well, and that's particularly as folks are moving into government. You can imagine with 20% of the population being FJCAM, there are a lot of folks in government who are FJCAM too, and the church is trying to talk to folks in government and say, you know, we need to be fair and just and not corrupt in the way we govern. And so this is kind of a part of that stream of speaking to society and building ethics in society as well. I see we're coming to 11, so I'm happy to stay around and have any other questions that folks want to ask. But
I have one more, if you may. When you take what you told us about Madagascar, can you generalize and overlay that to the other countries that you're working with as being similar?
No, I would say not really. I mean, for one thing, Malagasy society is very different from other societies in Southern Africa where I work. I mean, some of the social problems would be similar, but I think the cultural norms about dealing with them and addressing them would not necessarily be similar. Now, I mean, I shared the fact that the technique used in DRC, that the Church of Development DRC is being used in Madagascar. So there are some ways that those connections can be made, I think. But I would be reluctant to, I think the ways the church gets involved in the society could be the same, but our churches in Southern Africa are much smaller than the FJKM I mean, like in Zimbabwe, we work with 2 Presbyterian denominations. They're both about 20,000 people. So that's a much smaller to 6 million in
What is it in South Africa?
South Africa. I think the church, the UPCS, the Uniting Presbyterian Church is, I think, around 200,000. I never know because the UPCSA is a multinational church, so it covers Zambia, Zimbabwe, and now DRC as well. They've got DRC congregations. The bulk of the church is in South Africa, and I never know if those figures are for a larger area than just South Africa or not. Yeah,
So
thank you very much.
the area that we cover from Donegal is Eastern Cape, which doesn't have a very strong white influence. Okay, it is their own community, so it's a black community. So it is. You can go to Joburg and you go to Cape Town. That's a different kettle of fish that go to the Eastern Cape. Eastern Cape is a different culture, different language, so it's a miniature, I would say, of some of the issues. They have good education though. The churches, the Presbyterian churches, as I said, are fairly strong, but they also get this influence coming in from the Western culture. And they get all confused by that because they see all the goodies that the Western culture brings, and that's not, they can't afford it and they can't do those things. So that's what I've learned from going into a completely different part of South Africa that you think is white. It isn't. I'm often the only guy, or Bill goes with me. We're often the only guys that go to the church. There are some white people, but it's a very small. It's where Mandela was brought up, his own town. And he's actually buried in very close to one of the Presbyterian churches. The Presbyterians were involved in the funeral. So it was a black community that we're working with.
And I'd say that's true for the church as a whole now. I mean, the Uniting Presbyterian Church was formed in 1999 out of the merger of 2 denominations, one of which was about 60% white, the other which was about 99.9% black. And so these days, and also outside of South Africa, it's a largely black church too. So in urban areas, you'll find white congregations, but most of the rest of the country, it's a black church.
Doug, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for your support.